Great. Okay, I think we have a couple more people getting logged on. Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Adriana Link, and I am Assistant Director of Library and Museum Programming at the American Philosophical Society in Philadelphia. It's really wonderful to see so many of you on Zoom today. I know it's a beautiful day here, and thank you for spending this time with us. I'd like to welcome you to today's online launch of the Franklin Shop Books from 1730 to 1748, which is a new project created by the APS's Center for Digital Scholarship. I'd like to begin today's program by recognizing that the American Philosophical Society resides in Lenapehoking, which is the homeland of the Lenape people, whose ancestral relationships and connections with this land continue to this day and into the future. And the APS wishes to express its sincere thanks for the past and ongoing generosity of numerous Indigenous communities and individuals throughout this continent who have offered guidance, expertise, and opportunities for collaboration that make the work of the Society possible. For those of you who are joining for the first time, and I see some familiar faces in the attendees, but if you're new, the American Philosophical Society was founded by Benjamin Franklin in 1743 to support the promotion of useful knowledge. Election to membership. I'm getting a call. Election to membership honors those who have made significant contributions to science, the arts and humanities, and public life. And the Society promotes research by providing over $1.5 million in research grants a year to individuals who are working on projects spanning the arts, sciences, and humanities. Our library and museum collections and research centers serve scholars and visitors from across the globe. And if you're interested in learning more information about all the things that we do, please take a moment and visit our website at www.amphilsoc.org. So today's program continues the celebration of the 300th anniversary of Franklin's arrival in Philadelphia on October 6th, 1723. And some of you who may be tuning in today were lucky enough to attend the in-person recreation of that event that was held here in Philadelphia a couple of weeks ago. This program is also part of Archives Month Philly, which celebrates archives and the work of archivists, as well as the history in Philadelphia and the surrounding area. And you can learn more about some of the other programming that's happening in conjunction with Archives Month at their website, and we'll put that link for you in the chat as well. So I'm excited today to bring together these two celebrations of Franklin's arrival and of the possibilities of archives by welcoming two of my colleagues from the APS, Byron Miller and David Nelson, who will be sharing a new digital resource that explores the work of a young Benjamin Franklin and some of his early business ventures. So just a couple reminders for today's program before we get started. We are hosting this on Zoom webinar, so don't worry, you're automatically muted. However, we do hope that you'll have lots of questions and suggestions and things to share. So if you do at any point during today's program, please put those in the Q&A function, which is located at the bottom of your navigation bar. There'll be plenty of time during the program as well as at the end for questions and conversation with our speakers. So with that, I'm very pleased to hand things over to my colleagues, Associate Director of Research Engagement and Technology, Byron Miller, and Digital Project Specialist, David Nelson. So Byron, I'll hand things over to you.
Hey everyone, thanks Adriana. Put my slides here. Great. So one more second. All right. So hey everybody, thanks for coming out today. This project is one that's been in the works for many years. It has consumed a significant amount of my time and the time of my staff over the years. I'd be remiss if I didn't stress that this project that David and I are presenting today was truly collaborative in nature, and there are many individuals that made significant contributions to the project along the way. One that I particularly like to shout out is a former CDS staff member, Dr. Bethany Farrell. Bethany has spent the past several years of her working life thinking of nothing else but the Franklins and their shop over on Market Street. So a real special thank you to Bethany for all of her hard work. So That being said, the Ledgers project started way back in 2017 when we became interested in the records that Benjamin Franklin kept when he was postmaster at Philadelphia. As we looked into that project, we came across an entry in the Yale University's the Papers of Benjamin Franklin project, where they called these records and the information found in the postal records of no historical importance. And I really can't blame them, because as you see here, in their native form, these records would be painful for scholars to use. But with advances in technology, this has allowed us to reconsider these records, essentially move beyond digitization, turning records that look like this, and then painstakingly transcribing these records and turning them into detailed spreadsheets that look like this. So our team at the CDS transcribed each and every line in the postal accounts, creating these large data sets, which sort of gives users unprecedented access, not only to digitized images, but more importantly, to the information found within the page. So from there, we built out a website that hosts the data and also shows users what they can do with it and some of our interesting finds. But unlimited access to documented resources is the best part of working at the APS. You literally leave my office and go down into the stacks and pick up resources and do digital projects out of them. So if we have all of Franklin's account books at our disposal, why wouldn't we do more projects based around them? So since we already did had some postal records digitized, why not use his shop books? So we have all the shop books that Franklin and his wife, Deborah, kept at their Market Street. I pointed there because that's where my window is. So we started to transcribe these records too. During that time, we digitized and transcribed 3 of the main ledger books. While we were doing that, we started to wonder who the people were that were interacting with the shop and where else they might appear in Franklin's records in early American history. This was pretty difficult, as each ledger, as you can see here, each ledger has its own structure, and each person records the transactions that they take down in their own way. So it's kind of confusing when you open up a ledger and you see all the different hands, and sort of determining whose hand that was and how they were incorporating the data was a little bit tough for us. Fortunately, we came across the work of esteemed Franklin scholar Leo LeMay, who had already, in his own painstaking way, gone through all the account books and determined to a reasonable degree of certainty who everyone was in these books, and sort of laid it out here. As you can see in this document, you got everybody and all their entries, where they're living, and the dates. So from there, what we decided to do was to take the work that LeMay did and create unique identifiers for each person in Franklin's account books. So now, for the first time, we've created a relational database that allows users to research over all of Franklin's account books simultaneously at the same time. I'm going to hand it over to David now, because he's going to really get into the nitty-gritty and show you what we can do with this resource. So David, you can take it from there.
Okay, I just need a host to start my video. There we go. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Adriana, for your introduction. Thank you, Bayard, for introducing the project and its history. I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to take everyone to the live site as it currently is. And I am going to show you all what we have for you to peruse. So this is the new live Franklin Ledgers project, focusing on Franklin's shop books. The Franklin shop books cover the period from roughly 1730 to roughly 1748. There are a few entries from before, but there are also a few entries after. They kept the book around. They occasionally would add more materials to it, but this is really the early period. We remember that Franklin, retired from the printing business in 1748 to pursue other things. This really does cover the period during which he made a name for himself and built his career. So in this, we are going to offer 3 essays that give you some sense of what we discovered in the process of transcribing these ledgers. and turning them into data. The first is a general overview of what these ledgers even are as physical documents. We have this interactive graphic that shows you what types of transactions there were, in which year. We can see a lot of cash being exchanged, a lot of advertisements. It's oftentimes assumed that advertisements in the Pennsylvania Gazette were a huge source of why Franklin became as wealthy as he did. So that's makes sense. But then we also see a lot of paper being sold. Some books, some, blanks. So this gives you an overview of what we see sold on the aggregate level of the whole ledgers. And then we also have some information on how these ledgers are built and how to actually physically interact with the documents. So this can help people who want to go and look at the documents. And I'll show you later one of the ways in which we encourage people to access the documents. So that's our first contextual essay, what we have. Second one is on Deborah Read Franklin, who was Benjamin Franklin's wife, common law wife, I should say. We know from several sources that Deborah Franklin was crucial to Franklin's business affairs, both in his own autobiography. He credits her for assisting in the store, and then later when he lived in London, he gave her power of attorney to represent him. So she was truly a crucial part of the managing of the business. But one of the things we discovered in transcribing the ledgers was just how crucial she was during these early years of running the store. We discovered, you can see here some samples of her handwriting. And so we discovered that her hand was sufficiently distinct that we felt comfortable determining which entries were in her hand and which entries were in Benjamin Franklin's hand. And there are several ways in which we did this. As you can see from the sample here, her writing is fairly distinct, but then also she has a very idiosyncratic orthography. She doesn't usually write things the way that we would write them in modern spelling, but it's much more phonetic spelling. This actually made transcribing the ledgers very difficult because it was difficult to determine who was who, or what was being sold even occasionally. But it really allowed us to figure out how much she was present in the shop. There's still a lot of historical interpretive work that has to be done here to say what that means. It says that she was there and she recorded the transaction. But we have to make some imaginative leaps beyond that. What else was going on there? Who else was helping out in the shop who maybe isn't acknowledged in the ledgers? There's a lot of open questions there. But we provide then a visualization which shows the distribution between the two people in the shop. So this here is Deborah. This is Benjamin. We're colored according to gender, male customers being green, female customers being purple. And this allows you to visualize the activities of the shop over the period of the ledgers. You can pause it. You can see who the transactions are with on that month. You can go to a period that interests you. There's Deborah, there she appears. You can see, okay, they both have a transaction with this person. And then if you click on one of these people, this will take you to the database that I'm going to talk about later, and you can see all that person's transactions. So a little sneak peek what I'm about to talk to in about 5 minutes, but this is a resource that, can give us a sense visually of how much Deborah was present in the shop and how much she was doing. So then the last essay we have is about Franklin's involvement in the rag trade. As for those of you who are not scholars of history of the book or scholars of the 18th century, paper in the 18th century was made out of rags. It was made out of discarded rags that people couldn't wear anymore. So you would wear your clothes until you couldn't use them anymore, and then you turn them into rags. And when they were no longer usable, they'd go and become paper. And Franklin was huge, the Franklins, I should say, were huge purchasers of rags. They bought tons of rags. And this is one of the most common purchases that we see the Franklins making in these ledgers. They're also selling tons of paper, selling paper to a wide variety of people. And so we wrote a little essay here about how the Franklins sort of leveraged both sides of the supply chain in the paper trade. Paper was the largest cost that most printers in the 18th century occurred. And so the Franklins were very savvy in this regard in basically building relationships with paper manufacturers to provide them with the rags and then purchasing back the paper that they made. So, sort of a 18th century example of recycling, but also an example of how the Franklins really leveraged their business interests intelligently. So that is the one part of the project that we're launching and showing you today. But then also we have a database, which I think is really exciting. And this built off of the work that, one thing I should mention before I go to the database is that, again, echoing Byard, we are very grateful, or we're very dependent on Bethany Farrell here, who wrote a lot of the initial drafts for these 3 essays that we have here. So this really is showcasing her work as well. The database, moving on to that, is something I think is very exciting. Again, Bethany did a lot of the transcription of the entries that goes into these databases, and so we're very grateful to her. I also have to acknowledge here the work of former APS staff member Cynthia Hyder, who did a lot of the initial work on getting the database into a usable form and making all of the different ledgers interoperable. So the Franklin Ledgers database is going to provide users with access to all of the transcribed ledgers that we have. So we have not transcribed all of Franklin's ledgers yet. We've transcribed a good chunk of them. So we have financial records here from 1730 to 1748. That includes 3 ledgers. And then we have postal records from 1742 to 1752. So they kind of cover more or less the same period. And we can talk maybe a little bit later about some of the other things that we might add to this in the future. So the database is built using a tool called Dataset, which provides a very quick and easy way to make a relational database. So one of the things we hope is that this is a tool that people will be able to not only use what we've built, but that they'll be able to use the tool that we built to build their own databases. And this can serve as a model for that. We've already had some digital humanities fellows come in and use this tool to start exploring their own data. So it's a teaching resource as well as a resource to access Franklin's information. Let's access the database. And we have a keyword search, which everyone loves. So let's just do one. Laws, why not? So this will show you all of the results that we get in the database, and we can move to the main table of results. And we can see here the transcription of all the material. So we have the date, we have the person who we've identified here. This is the province of Pennsylvania. We have the transaction type. Is it a debit or a credit or a memo? We have a transcription of what's in the ledgers. We have controlled description to help you access other types of information. I'll talk about that in a bit. More narrow control descriptions to help facilitate keyword searching, and then the price. Also importantly, I want to point out, we have a link to the actual manuscript page, which hopefully is going to load. There it goes. It's a little slow. I'll open that in a new browser. So you can actually go in and verify whatever we transcribed. And you can see then, oh yes, okay, this is correct price and correct information. Sometimes it's useful to look at the manuscript page because sometimes they refer to different things. They refer to a higher insurance page. So this is a useful feature to have to see not just the data we created, but also to verify it against the manuscript. We can then click on the index of one of these people, and we will access all of their transactions in the database. So we can see everything that Franklin here did with the province of Pennsylvania from all of the different ledgers. And this will then also, of course, include the postal transactions, if there are any. I'm not sure if the province of Pennsylvania has any postal transactions. No, it looks like they don't. That would make any sense. And then if you want to export it to a CSV or another or a JSON format to use another tool to visualize this data, you can't. So hopefully this is something that professors who teach digital humanities will be able to use to give their students access to data. So we have full text search as one way of accessing the database, but we also allow you to access the database through several other things. I think one thing that's going to be very exciting for a lot of people is the ability to search by a person. These are those LeMay IDs that Bayard and I were mentioning earlier. So this is based on the work of Leah LeMay, and we tried as best as we could to determine each person in the ledger to a reasonable degree of certainty. This is difficult because people were referred to by different names. There might have been 40, probably not 40, but there might have been several, people under the same name in one city. People gave their son the same name as them. And so, we tried as best as we could to distinguish who these people were. I'm not sure we were always 100% successful, but it is a really huge starting point to be able to find these people. So we can search for somebody in here, for instance, we can search for, more famous people we know really from Benjamin Franklin's biography, or, like there's the Quaker teacher and abolitionist, Anthony Benezet. We can find all his transactions here fairly easily. But then we can also find people who maybe we don't know as well. So for instance, one person who had quite a few transactions in the database was a Mrs. Staples. We don't know who this woman is, but we found all of her transactions, and we can see it's quite interesting. She's only referred to as Mrs. Staples, so we assume she's married, maybe widowed, and they just lent cash to her several times. And Deborah Franklin was actually the one who lent her cash, as you can see from lent cash by Debbie. So, we don't really know who this person is, but this is a point where a historian could find all the information that we have about her and use this as a means to start thinking about questions like, what was it like for this type of woman in colonial Philadelphia? What other sources might we look at to find more information about her or people like her? How are the Franklins keeping their accounts? How are they doing this type of thing? One other person that I want to mention, is here we see somebody who's getting loaned a lot of money, right? Cash at another time, lent money, lent cash to her. We don't really know what this says about her finances or Franklin's. It means that she needed to be loaned a lot of money. But the Franklins didn't always consistently record whether things were paid or not. So we really can't make a whole lot of assumptions. But we can, search for somebody like Stephen Potts. I mentioned Stephen Potts because he's very interesting in that he has the most transactions in the ledgers. And this is, he worked, so Benjamin Franklin and Stephen Potts both worked for Samuel Keimer before Franklin started his own print shop. And then Franklin kind of poached Potts and a few other people from Keimer. And Potts actually lived with Franklin for a period of time. And he was a bookbinder, and he bound a lot of books. There are records in the library company's minutes of him binding books to the library companies. He bound a lot of books for Franklin. And so here we see examples of the types of interactions that they had, the rent that he had to pay to him. They charged him for taking sugar or taking bacon. So it gives you a bit of a sense of maybe what it was like in this household, and how Franklin was working with his closest business associates and the people he lived with. So I'm going to stop in a moment, but I do also want to show that we have the ability then also to browse the database via the goods and services that the Franklins offered. So, for instance, we can see all of the Bibles that Franklin sold. This might be interesting to somebody. And we can see who he was selling Bibles to, or who was purchasing Bibles. We can see how much they cost, how much a Bible versus just a Testament costs, how much a more fancy bound one costs versus, a more simple one. It gives us a lot of information about the various costs of these items, the various values ascribed to them. Or one thing I think is very exciting for me is that we can also then see all of the little jobs that the Franklins offered. Many of us, we know in the history of the book that the main way that print shops made their money was through little jobs. For the Franklins, it's oftentimes assumed that he made most of his money via his newspapers, second most via his almanacs, and then the little jobs were the third. So they made even more money than the books that he published, which is a little counterintuitive for us from a modern perspective, but it's something it's fairly well established in the history of the book. The problem with little jobs is they don't survive usually. They very often were thrown away. They very often they were just like, just like we might have, posters for an event we advertise at a university, we might save a copy or we might throw it away. It was the same thing in the 18th century. And so here we can see how much of the shop was devoted to the printing of these little jobs, who was purchasing them, how much they were paying for them, how much money was coming in from them. And it gives us a sense of some of these documents that are really crucial to the history of the book that otherwise are not surviving in any other form. So I think that this database hopefully will allow people to really explore the data in a richer way. It will allow people to, none of this is new information. We've had these account books for quite a while, but it provides people access to it in a way that they didn't necessarily have before. And hopefully that makes this information more useful to people. And just because I didn't talk about the postal records at all, I do want to say, it's also then useful to go in and see, does this person have any postal transactions? How much are they paying in post? So here's an example, Samuel Parr. You can see he's purchasing both in the Franklin shop, and he's also purchasing, he's also getting mail and also paying the Franklins for mail. So you can use this two forms of information together to start to maybe get a picture of what are the Franklin's business dealings, what are the business dealings of an individual person, and other sort of related questions. So I think with that, I'm going to end my piece. And I think I'm going to turn it over to Adriana for questions and conversation.
Great. Thank you both so much. And I think Byron's here. Great. So we have some questions coming through in the Q&A, really great questions, and encourage others who are on the call. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A, and we'll try to get to as many as we can with the time that remains. Really interesting question, I think, just to start us off is where did these come from? So, these are fantastic resources, and you've given us a good sense of the different types of information that we might pull from these ledger books. But how did the APS end up with them? Did they all come from one spot? Can you give us a little bit more about the history of these objects, just to get us going?
Ooh, yeah. So I guess first, we're a Franklin shop founded by Franklin, so it's just natural that we have many of his papers. But they came to us in sort of dribs and drabs, but the main bulk of the body of what we have here. So when Franklin died, he bequeathed all of his papers and manuscripts to his grandson, William Temple Franklin. Then William Temple Franklin left for London, never returned, took some of the papers with him, but left the majority of them in the care of his friend George Fox in Philadelphia. So I think it was in 1840 or so that Fox's descendants, Charles and Mary Fox, donated most of the material in their possession to the APS, and we've had them and stewarded them since that time. So.
Great. Thanks. Would love to hear you talk a little bit more. I'm really struck by this visualization that you've put together, which obviously is mostly men, which makes sense given the times. But obviously, as those of us at the APS know, Deborah was a pretty key component to all of Franklin's business transactions. But would love to hear you talk a little bit more about the process by which you went to figure out who these people were, either going through the shop and discerning a little bit more about their backgrounds. Can you give us a better sense of that process and maybe some still lingering unanswered questions to that end as well?
Yeah, I can take this one. So this is still very an open thing, and we still have a lot of anxiety whether or not we figured out who these people were correctly. I think a lot of it goes back to the very careful work of Leo LeMay. What Leo LeMay did really was he didn't so much look at other sources, but he really considered, when we look at these ledgers cohesively, who are these people? What are the chains of transactions that are occurring? When do we see people getting paid back? And by doing this type of thing, where do we see transactions overlap? So one of the things that I didn't mention is that we have two types of account books here. We have shop books, and then we have ledger. We have day books and we have ledgers. So day books were books that they just reported things in as people came into the shop, and then ledgers were where you held the actual official transactions. And so we are sometimes able to triangulate between what's in the ledger and what's in the day book to figure out, okay, this person must be the same. Sometimes then we're able to go off and find some other source. Genealogists are always our best friends in this regard because they always find people that we are not going to find otherwise. But you know, sometimes we couldn't find anything else about these people. And there's also over 4,000 people that we've identified. So it's not possible for us to verify each and every single person. So you have to go on sort of like, okay, they called this person, you know, mother here, they called her neighbor here. Why would they be calling her two different things? Seems really unlikely they're a different person, but from our perspective, we're going to be a little conservative and we're going to say, okay, these are two separate people just because they seem to be referring to them in different ways. So that's a lot of the work that we did.
Great. Sorry, the questions are pouring in, which is very exciting. So I'm trying to keep track of everything. A couple of questions about how to keep track of who is paying back their bills. So question here specifically about whether or not you can tell if Mrs. Staples or others came clean with paying back all of her bills. Did they lend money to people all the way to the end of the ledgers, or during a particular time not lend anything at all? So I guess a question about kind of their lending habits and whether or not that changed in the documents that you're working with.
Yeah. So this is a really good question. So one thing I should mention is that the ledgers are somewhat incomplete. So we have ledger A and ledger B. We have ledger D. So we assume there's a ledger C, but we don't have it. And then we know there's a ledger E, and we don't have it. We don't know where it is. It hasn't turned up. So what they did is in 1748, when Franklin retired, he bought ledger E, which we don't have, and he transferred all outstanding debts to ledger E. And occasionally, sometimes these amounts of money are quite large. And occasionally he'll come back then in the old ledger and he'll say that it was canceled or it was settled, you know, whatever settled means. I don't know what this means. It's a barter economy. So, you know, it might be that somebody rendered him enough service. They said, okay, good. But we don't know. Bethany Farrell, who we've mentioned several times, who did a lot of this work, thought that the Franklins were not necessarily the neatest accountants, and that they oftentimes just sort of didn't record what things happened. So I think that they might have been accruing massive debts, or it might have been that they just were not doing a good job of reporting when things were paid off. But we do, so we're missing the account book that would have a lot of the information about them being paid off. I do know that Franklin does come after people occasionally for money, because you do see accounts getting settled. To see that he'll write like he'll tabulate how much that person owes, and then 2 weeks later it will be paid. And so, you know, you can make an assumption there that he got fed up and went to get his money.
I'll add that with the postal ledgers, we do know that Franklin came out very much in the red at the end of his tenure as postmaster, and people did owe him a significant amount of money and never settled their debts. So.
Perennial favorite about whether or not you've taken the time to convert any of the amounts to today's dollars.
I haven't. I don't think David has either.
I know that Cynthia did some of the research on Cynthia Hyder, who did a lot of the initial work on this. She did some of the work to figure out what the exchange rate was. It's very difficult because it covers a period of time, and so they're exchanging in British pound sterling, but it's not actually equivalent to British pound sterling in London at the time. It would be a slightly inflated value for that. And a lot of these transactions actually are not occurring in actual pound sterling. It's occurring through bartering, in which they're assigning a price to it. So, or it's occurring in other forms of currency, because there are multiple forms of currency circulating at this point. So the short answer is, due to the complexity of this, we have not attempted to convert. It's something I think might be useful, but it's also hard, even just as an aside, it's hard to even figure out the total amount of money being transacted, because the Franklins are not always very diligent about marking whether things got paid or what was going on. So unfortunately, no.
I would throw back to the audience. We'd like you to do some of that work. And if you do that work and you find anything interesting, please follow up with us. We always do these projects, we put them out there because we can only go so far, and then we can move on to other projects. But we won't be able to use these and want to know how people are using these. So if you find anything interesting, please definitely follow up with David.
So a couple of questions in the chat, and also a question that I had about what these ledgers can kind of tell us about kind of daily life, about the people who are involved. I love the question here from D. Andrews about whether or not, if you can tell from the ledgers, the geographical scope of the Franklins' dealings. So, you know, what does this actually tell us about the Franklins in ways that maybe historians have only started to talk about? So that's part one. And then, do you have records written by people other than Ben and Deborah? So do you see other people's handwriting come up in the ledgers?
I can start. So I'll answer the second question first because it's easier. Yes, we do see other hands. There is a third hand that appears, or several hands. We haven't identified all of them. And there are not very many of these in Ledger A and in the shop book. And I should mention, we've only done hand analysis. We've only did hand analysis for Ledger A and the shop book because that's the only place where Deborah's hand comes up, and she was the person we were interested in. So there's a few entries written by somebody else. Maybe this was an apprentice, a journeyman, an indentured servant. We don't know who it was, but there are several other written by somebody else who we've not been able to identify. Ledger D and the postal records were written by professional secretaries, so we don't know whose hands those are in, and so that was not included in our analysis. But open questions. Hopefully we'll find some documents that have their handwriting on it, and we can identify who these people were. We don't know everyone who worked in Franklin shop, unfortunately. As to the other question, I don't know if the ledgers reveal anything new about Franklin's geographic stretch, but they do show a lot of business dealings throughout British North America. We have transactions with people in Boston that he sent materials that he printed he sent them to Boston to be bound. We know that Franklin sent 2 people down to South Carolina to try to set up a print shop there. And those transactions are recorded. A lot of these things are not self-evident from the ledgers because they didn't necessarily record in them where the person was from. If they knew who the person was, they didn't record it. You know, it was like, oh, I know who this guy is. I don't need to put down where he's from. If they had to disambiguate it, they would record who these people were. So we'd have to go in and do some information about the biographies of these people to figure it out. But we do, for people who know Franklin's biography a little bit, there are a lot of clues about the different areas that he spread his business to. And we do see those transactions recorded in the ledgers as proof.
Just to add, I think there's a question about day-to-day life too, and what you can glean from that. I think that you can just see. It's really interesting with the account books. You can just get a sense of sort of, I guess, kind of like daily life in Philadelphia at the time. Just like on each day, who's coming and going from the shop. Sort of see who would be part of the conversations of that day, what they're buying, where they're going with. So I think this will open that up a little bit.
Yeah, I forgot that part of the question. Thank you for. You do like it is interesting because like you see Deborah Franklin selling butter, you know, and other things like that you wouldn't necessarily expect. I think it opens a lot of questions, but you know, you can imagine maybe somebody sold her too much butter and she had to get rid of it before it went off. And so I don't know, it opens speculation, but
Too, it's interesting. I think all the printed material that's being sold out of the shop is interesting too, and you can kind of see sort of what lots of people were reading at the time. If there's a significant amount of people reading the same pamphlets, reading the same books, Bibles, how things sell. I think that offers a lot of clues to that as well.
So a very specific question that maybe is in the account books that you may or may not have an answer to, from Marianne Eves, about whether or not there's any details on where Franklin purchased his paper for the print shop. So since we talked a little bit about the paper, do we know actually where those sources were coming from?
Yes, kind of. No, I don't know. I was going to drop the data story to the rag trade in there.
Yeah.
There's a history there. I don't know specifically where he was sourcing his paper from off the top of my head.
Bethany did try to figure out, sorry that I'm looking at my second monitor, so I can see if I can find this. She did try to figure out all of the people that Franklin sold rags to and where they were located, and those would be paper makers that so I'm gonna drop something in the chat that one of the hosts can share with everyone. But she did try to figure out where all of these paper makers were located, and she made a map of this. I don't know if your paper maker that you're asking about is accounted for here. We do know that he had quite a wide spread of people he was selling rags to. Franklin does not record all the paper that he purchases, because we know, I think before 1735, Franklin didn't really have a source for paper. He had to purchase it from other people, and those transactions are not recorded. So we might be able to, by looking through the database, begin to see maybe who he purchased the paper from. Maybe this paper seller that you are interested in is in there. I don't know off the top of my head if they are, but this database could certainly begin to answer that question, if not provide a definitive answer to it.
Fired, anything else to no? Okay. Question from Michael Skelly about Deborah and whether or not her involvement was typical or unusual in terms of Franklin's accounting. And I know that this is something that we've been kind of thinking about a lot at the APS, about how to kind of get Deborah more front and center. So if either of you wants to kind of talk a little bit more about your feelings and how they may have changed about Deborah Franklin since working on this project.
Did it have your feelings changed?
I don't know how typical her I think generally I don't want to answer the typicality of it, but I do think that it's quite interesting to see the work that she does, the work that she's able to do. She's performing very complex mathematical calculations. She has to weigh all the rags, for instance, because the rags are sold in weight. And you just have to wonder how this was done. Did they have a scale that was large enough to accommodate 800 pounds of rags, or did they have to perform calculations? She assisted in lifting the rags and doing all these other types of things. Who else was she interacting with? It's quite incredible to think that she is interacting with there's transactions between her and the governor of Pennsylvania. She's meeting with all levels of society, not just nameless people like Mrs. Staples, but also very important people. And you start to understand why she was given power of attorney to represent him later in Franklin's life. She was really doing a lot of it. Now, some scholars have said Deborah Franklin ran the shop, and I think we can say here that yes, she was really important in running it, but the majority of the transactions are still in Benjamin's hands. I don't want to diminish her accomplishments. I think they're really crucial. I don't think the shop could have run without her. We just don't know how. We know whose hand is in. We don't know, was she running it day to day, and was he off doing something else, and then he came home and just wrote all the transactions down? We don't know. It's at least one way of seeing just how much work she did and how crucial she was and how central she was. So it goes far beyond her just stitching pamphlets together, as Franklin says in his autobiography.
To that, I mean, her role was so significant that we found we changed the sort of the scope of the project to not just talk about Benjamin Franklin's account books, but now it's the Franklin's account books. So I think that's something much different for us.
So we're getting a lot of questions in the Q&A, and I'm going to share all of these with David and Bard because they're fantastic and I think helpful for the next phases of this project. But I do kind of want to turn to that question now. So, the Center for Digital Scholarship creates a number of very useful projects and resources for not just scholars, but for anyone who's wanting to work with this data. Are there particular kinds of questions? I know that we can't answer everything as people who work with these collections, but are there particular types of questions that have come up for you that you think would be really wonderful for either scholars or teachers or anyone to tackle just based on the preliminary work that you have done?
I think there's a lot of things that this will open the door to. Obviously, we did some initial work with the gender and seeing like what genders represented in purchasing in colonial Philadelphia. It would be very interesting with our database. It'd be very interesting to extract all the transactions by women and to see women's contributions to fiscal life in colonial Philadelphia. I think it'd be interesting, I've hinted this before already, it'd be interesting to get some data behind this claim that, job printing was so important for printers in colonial Philadelphia, in the hand press period writ large. And you could extract all of these types of transactions with this data set, and you could begin to answer more mathematically, is this true? What is the proportion of this? I don't know, there's so many things you could do. You could look at, did the Great Awakening have an effect on the sale of Bibles? Can we track religiosity via the types of books that are being sold? What books are being sold here that aren't in other records? It'd be very easy to find that type of thing out at this point.
I'll just say, because our job, so we have to move on to projects on can't spend time. We really want the audience to go at this and come up with questions, and I really want to do a lot of user testing to figure out if people can find answers to the questions that they're going at the database with. If they can't, then how can we make the database better? Where do we need to get more data from? These projects never end here, just with all our other open data projects. More data is better, and it'd be great in the next phase to incorporate more data, to incorporate maybe take the LeMay index and apply it to other data sets to see if these people show up, say, in our indenture records, just an example, or any other early colonial Philadelphia data set, and bring that stuff into the database as well. I just say things, and David probably shakes his head like we can't do that, but
I mean, this is a question that actually I had, and one of our audience members had too, about it. Is there kind of a natural next set of database or next set of ledgers that would kind of benefit from this kind of analysis? I mean, Franklin obviously is our founder and merits this sort of analysis, but are there other folks in our collections who you think it would be really revealing to do this extensive work in putting together a project like this one?
Well, in our collections, so next phase for this project, we would talk about the receipts that we have in our collection that are in the Franklin collection. Other account books for us, we don't have. This is the only collection that I know of that we have this like big, massive volume of account books that we do this with. We have other collections like our weather records project that we have a significant amount of weather diaries kept by all sorts of different individuals spread throughout all our collections. And David and I are currently working on a project that is digitizing those, transcribing those, and building a relational database of early American weather. So that's where we're going with this. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Dave.
Yeah, we do also have time is limited, and human labor is finite, but we do have some other things that would be interesting to think about. Like, for instance, we have David Hall's business records. So Franklin forms a partnership with David Hall in 1748 to take over the business. And so that would still be Franklin, but it continues sort of it and shows another person. We also have the, I believe we have the receipt book of Deborah Franklin's mother, who helped out in the shop. And it would be very interesting to see what her contribution was. Is it related to her daughters? Is it different? In terms of other, I'm sure, you know, I never want to say we don't have something, because I'm always proven wrong when we open a box and find something. So I'm sure there are other things that we eventually will be able to do this. One thing I also want to say, though, is that if you know, other archives have records that are interesting and show narratives of people that are not reflected in our collection, because oftentimes, you know, it is the case that we have Benjamin Franklin, and Benjamin Franklin is not necessarily the most interesting person. He's very interesting in some ways, but he's also not. You know, he's a very wealthy dead white man. But if you have records in your collections that would benefit from this type of treatment, then you know, we're trying to build tools that would allow you to be able to do that type of thing as well. And that would be something that I think we'd be interested in exploring and talking about.
Well, I think that that's a nice segue, actually, to kind of conclude our conversation today, and to thank folks for tuning in, and maybe to encourage you, if you're interested in getting your hands involved with some of the APS's digital materials. There is an event happening here next week, a transcription event that looks at similar types of records through the Revolutionary City Project. So if you're interested in attending that and learning more about the work of the Center for Digital Scholarship, I really encourage you to visit our website and to sign up for that program. In the meantime, I want to thank David and Byard for sharing this information with us, sharing this project with us. It's all up and available on the website. We can all spend the rest of the afternoon playing around and figuring out our own questions about the material culture and economy of early Philadelphia. Yeah.
Yeah, it's oh yeah, that's a question first. Yeah, the project's up, it's active. You'll probably find things that are wrong or things that don't work, and please let us know. This is the first day that it's actually live. So yeah, and again, I'll give another plug. Like, if you use our data, use our tools, we really want to hear from you. I truly mean that. It's really great to get these data sets out there, but when if we don't know what people are doing with them, then we don't know what people need from them. So yeah.
I'll also add to that, we are going to be developing some type of tutorial for using this database, probably in video format. So watch out for that in the next coming months. And if you have issues with using the database, or if you have things that you don't understand, we'd love to hear with you so that we can include that in our tutorial so that everyone can use the tool better.
Great. And it seems like we'll be doing more programming around this one as well. So looking forward to that. Thank you both. Thank you all. Be well and see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Take care.